Hello, horrorphiles. You're listening to Dissecting Horror,
examining the anatomy of fear in film, television, and literature.
I'm filmmaker Stephen Aguilera.
I'm writer and performer Kelsey Zukowski.
In this episode, we dissect the film Abigail. This dissection will be spoiler-free, aside from one point, which the marketing immediately spoils, and so we will too.
We are the Horror Whisperers, your champions of horror.
In our society of grotesquerie and loathing, if you will.
I will, and we hope you will subscribe for more, won't you?
While holding the 12-year-old daughter of a powerful underworld figure captive, a group of kidnappers discovers she's actually a bloodthirsty vampire, according to Peacock, where this film is now streaming. Right off the bat, we have here a tricky point to navigate when it comes to marketing this film, which is somewhat forced to spoil that Abigail is in fact a vampire. In the film itself, this is not revealed until about 49 minutes in. It's a twist I think the filmmakers were originally counting on to be a big moment. Yet, I can't help but consider that even in the writing stage, they should have realized this point necessitating spoiling, if their target fans of the vampire genre were to be informed of its subject matter.
A huge reason this film made me want to see it initially was simply it being focused on a child vampire ballerina. I get marketing as such as I think it was the key enticing factor for many, but if they would have kept some mystery here, painting Abigail as a victim, even with the knowledge of the film being a heist goes wrong and churns to a descending darkness trapped in the house with them, that twist could have been so enticing and made it even more thrilling ride. A part of me didn't care because I was excited for what I knew we were getting, and once we got it, I was just loving the ride, while still being taken with the compelling dark fascination of the survival horror story. But a part of me realizes the added edge-of-your-seat thrill that we could have had. There is mystery there, and while the first act is still interesting and fun, the film doesn't really feel like it begins until the reveal that is a secret to no one in Act 2.
Abigail is played by Irish actress Alicia Weir, who played every note of her character effortlessly and brilliantly. She is adorable and funny, while at the same time vicious and terrifying. Despite her age, she really gets the part and commits and has fun with it. There's also something amusing to me in knowing that these filmmakers put this little girl, this actress, square into that much blood and guts and violence. It's twisted and real as a layer of the film I think about while watching it that also fits the tone of the story. I'm assuming she wasn't traumatized anyway.
I've seen a few interviews with her about the film, and she just looks like she's having so much fun. Like, she just seems like she's really loving it. When this film first came on my radar, all I knew about it was that it was a vampire ballerina subject, which honestly was enough for me. Then I realized the cast, which only pulled me in more. I was utterly mesmerized by Alicia Weir's Matilda and Matilda the Musical, and I gotta say, it was such a treat to see her transform that boldness, spark, wit, and power into a more ruthless, ferocious, and bloodthirsty character. She is incredible here, nailing the fear and vulnerabilities, the deranged childlike joy, and the vicious predator, while still letting in just enough human yearnings to make her feel more real. Melissa Barrera offers a smart, determined, strong final girl character, continuing to show how her talents fit well into the horror genre. She has her own demons and regrets to deal with, and isn't in unflinching strength, which is just more realistic and refreshing. She has compassion, grit, and intuition, all equal parts of her that she listens to. She also offers a very likable protagonist we can get behind, investing us through her fight until the end, even when we can't help but feel a certain pull to Abigail. As always, I loved Katherine Newton, who is always incredibly fun to watch and just thrives in horror comedy material. She brings out the fiery hacker chilled to the bone, determined to escape the horror before it alters her. She shows great personality, edge, and presence throughout the film. There was one particular scene where you could see her really transform. That was just a joy to watch, and I can imagine she must have had such a fun time filming. Matthew Good's cameo, while brief, offered a commanding and devious portrayal, offering great sequel or even prequel potential to explore his character further and dive deeper into Abigail's origins and early days, to how she became who she was and how the two's relationship altered over time.
I have to say, I do kind of resent children like her, for example, a 12-year-old who can outact most adults, and I'm sure myself. And then you see those little fuckers who can play piano or drums better than 99% of professionals, and they're like 5. So I think, you could take a couple years off of them for being in diapers or whatever, and that's only about 3 years they actually spent learning. I bet then I could learn piano if I start now and could also be that good in those same 3 years. But yeah.
Never too late.
Well, it doesn't really work that way. I think it's possibly because nobody ever told them that it's supposed to be hard, and so they don't know that it is, and so they just do it. But there are things for sure they can't do well in a short span, like writing screenplays, since they lack sufficient life experience, if nothing else. But gymnastics, violin, or chess are somehow doable. That's my rant.
Yeah, there's a lot. There's certain things I think when you just learn and are just so consumed in it at a young age. Like I was nowhere near Abigail level, but I did theater a lot as a kid. So I did dance and music and things like that too. And even, I think I got more into dance a little later, but even as like a 13-year-old, I felt like almost behind because there was so many people who had done like all these different forms of dance just continuously since they were like 3, and they were just amazing, incredible, even at that early age. So there are definite benefits to just kind of consuming yourself. But then I guess you also get into like the whole child actor thing of like how much, I mean, if they genuinely love it, but there's still discipline and hard work. If that's just a huge part of your life from a young age, becomes, okay, where's like the childhood and just fun aspects that are kind of essential to your like development and not being damaged adult.
Yeah, there's got to be a balance there. I used to draw from an early age. That was probably better than most people, and I always thought that if I took karate when I was 3 or something, I'd be a black belt by the time I was 5 or something like that. I took it off and on later in my childhood, and I always felt a certain apathy that, I'm too late. It's kind of like, I'm bringing this back to Star Wars again, but Jedis, they have to train when they're like little tiny tykes. And once you're a certain age, like 10 or 11, then it's too late for you. So hopefully that's not where I got it from, but yeah, that's my story.
But screenplays, experience, age.
Yeah, never mind learning how to read and write.
Yeah.
What struck me immediately was the attention to character development and clever dialogue. These people are not disposable cookie-cutter lambs to the slaughter. Care was taken to give each a distinct personality, impossible to confuse with the others, and was cast with equal attention. These are criminals, yet we can root for each based on at least one positive trait amid their more unsavory layers. And despite their fatal flaws, we like being in their company. In fact, if anything, a good baddie has mostly good traits with only 1 or 2 bad. The characters play off each other well, as these disparate and desperate characters manage to band together in fighting a common foe. And when someone does die, it actually means something. There's an early scene where they're all trying to suss each other out, which may be my favorite in the film, despite it having nothing to do with horror. It's just 6 characters in a room getting to know each other. By the end of it, we clearly understand that each has a past and a goal for their future. In this present, that is all we are actually shown. Those details of all these characters are conveyed economically and entertainingly, managing to avoid any bland or uncreative exposition dumps.
There is some exquisite choreography and execution, taking us from graceful pirouettes to high kicks and hissing ending in a primal, vicious attack. There is a fun juxtaposition, but also in moments like this, it plays with the perceptions of femininity and innocence, taking the elegant, pretty, sweet little girl image and tearing it into its flesh to show the ferocity and strength underneath. Abigail herself is largely portrayed as a cunning, vicious, maniacal monster, but she also has moments of emotional vulnerability, connection, and yearnings that make her that much more engaging and nuanced as a villain. I appreciate the character dynamics between her and her subjects, but especially with Melissa Barrera's character. I won't dive into details, but there's fantastic electricity between them, taking several different forms. As a whole, even with other characters outside of Abigail, we are given such a beautiful range, flaws included, on the female characters here, giving validity to everyone from the girly to the gutsy persona, both offering softness and sharpness in their own ways. This isn't a coming-of-age film or identity-focused film, so it didn't need to be much more of a conversation, but simply the reminder and representation, powered by the striking extreme duality of Abigail herself, is wonderfully refreshing. And as a whole, I agree. Like, the the characters, I think, were really interesting and complex, and we get a certain feel for them without necessarily needing to know everyone's full story, and they definitely work off each other really well, and there's mystery and estrangement, and like within them they're trying to figure out each other and how they want to navigate, which I think also helps create some of the mystery, because even though because of the marketing we kind of knew what type of film this was going to be and who was going to be the villain, there is still a lot that is unknown to them. One of them could be in on it. So it's, an interesting way of kind of trying to figure each other out. And it was kind of refreshing in a way that none of the characters were all good or bad. Even Abigail, honestly, because there's some instances where you can feel for who she was, and even things like loneliness kind of tapping in. But all the characters as a whole, they're complex and interesting and fun, essentially.
They have depth.
Yeah.
There's a lot of tricks you can do as a writer to give a character depth. I think my favorite example in, let's say, Pulp Fiction, where, did you see Pulp Fiction?
Yeah.
There's a point in the diner where he says, garçon, garçon, to the waitress, and she answers the question or whatever and says, garçon means boy, as she leaves. You never see her face, but you get a sense like, oh, that little line gives her such depth. And there are a number of ways of implementing depth into small, lesser characters or major characters, which I've picked up in seminars and books and stuff over the years. But I can really appreciate and recognize when I see it, as anybody can, not just because I've taken a seminar, but it's so refreshing, especially in horror films. I was particularly struck here by the humor, which acts as an effective pressure valve to the mounting tension. The levity also lends depth to these characters, who cleverly reveal much about themselves through their jokes and wit. Overall, it was horrifying and hilarious at the same time. The filmmakers were routinely somehow able to combine horrific moments with comical moments in a way that didn't feel forced, but perfectly united in the most enjoyable of ways. Though not really a comedy, the over-the-topness of the humor and the horror worked well together. It's fun, but never campy in style.
While it begins as a heist film, when Abigail's true nature is revealed, the film quickly shifts to a cat-and-mouse chase horror film. There is still an unraveling mystery with compelling reveals of who could have conned them into kidnapping a vampire child and trapping them in a house of horrors with no way out or communication with the outside world. Abigail presents a wonderfully crafted and well-balanced horror comedy, having fun with itself while keeping the sinister dread and macabre entrapping reality alive. Among this, I appreciate they largely let the heist film dissolve into the background, to let the radiant and demented fun and sheer horror reign. While I loved elements of it, I felt like Renfield, similar in being a vampire complicated relationship, tongue-in-cheek crime heist film, let the crime and action take over, pushing the more compelling, complex, and dark elements to the back, while this let its allegiances slide deeper into horror.
If I have one major gripe, it's about how characters shed who they are with all their marvelous character development once becoming a vampire. They are suddenly a different person rather than the same person with that additional vampire layer now added. They become lesser characters, more generic cackling villains drunk with evil, abruptly disregarding their carefully developed traits and arcs. They convert into one-dimensional caricatures I no longer care for, neither intimidating nor interesting. This seems out of step with everything else written, making me suspicious that it was more of a studio note or directorial decision. It is also possibly a change introduced by a later writer.
Yeah, that wasn't really a gripe or issue I had, but that tracks. One character in particular pretty much loses entire personality, and I think the portrayal is definitely more comical, one note, and less interesting.
There's something about becoming a vampire, which I think implies that you're suddenly going to become a vampire caricature. You're going to be more arrogant or somehow overwhelmed with the ecstasy of the power that you now have, and it's just going to make you a different person. But I don't see that as, what was it? There was an example of something. Oh, I was watching a review for Star Wars Acolyte, God, I got to stop talking about Star Wars every other. Anyway, one of them turns to the dark side, and they have the opposite problem where they didn't really turn evil at all. They're just exactly the same character, and that may have been down to the acting. But yeah, there's something to be said for maintaining the character traits and keeping that consistent, or else it's not really the same person anymore.
Yeah. I mean, of course, you can establish and have differences in lore, but in most vampire lore, it takes key personality traits of who you were as a human and just amplifies them. So if you were, I don't know, if you were like an intuitive person, you would have almost like psychic. I mean, not that you wouldn't already, but, it would be that much more intensified. So if anything, it would be even more a part of who you were.
Now, in a film's credits, if the full word and, A-N-D, is found between the names of two or more screenwriters, they were separated writers working on separate drafts. If instead of A&D an ampersand is used, the symbol you get when holding Shift 7 on your keyboard, that means they collaborated as a writing team. This film was written by Stephen Shields and A&D Guy Busick, the latter having worked with the film's co-directors many times prior. I can't say Guy was the cause of my vampire character gripe, but there is a clear shift there in the writing as to make me wonder. Other uncredited writers may have also been involved, so who knows? Probably a too many cooks in the kitchen thing there in some way, steering things from how the rest of the film was going along.
Well, I did largely enjoy the vampire elements from our protagonists, initial brainstorming and recapping on vampire limitations with references to Anne Rice and True Blood, to the ferocious and playful nature of the vampires. The depiction of vampire lore and how it manifested in this world is a half-baked, inconsistent mess, and easily the film's most glaring flaw. Many things come into play clearly for story convenience and are consistent and even illogical. The film never really establishes the strengths, weaknesses, and realities of what vampirism looks like. There are contradictions in how a few things play out that aren't consistent with pretty much all other vampire lore, especially regarding age, strength, mind control, and how vampires are bred. The portrayal of effects of a vampire kill, bite, and blood offering is one of the most glaring issues. The most severe has no lasting effect other than the damage to the body. They're much more minimal and tame have hypnotic powers, while something more severe, which one would think would mean control and enslavement to its master, gives its bearer total power and independence. It's okay if the film wanted to go a different route with how this played out in the world they created. That is one of the exciting and creative freedoms with really any monsters and being able to create the realities of it in your own piece of fiction. Still, you have to establish it, especially if you're going to go a different way. There were moments that things seemed too easy, where a vampire seemed weaker or stronger than they should be, as well as certain connections or powers not seeming to really be ignited to take hold like they do. It wasn't anything that altered my fun or took me out of it severely, but it was a noticeable shortcoming that forced me to pause and question it, even among the most gratifying moments. This is disappointing as it's really the only thing the film missed the mark on, and it could have been fixed by simply establishing its vampire lore with even a few lines that clarified and made it feel more defined, consistent, and free of any possible plot holes.
Bringing it back to Star Wars again, there were certain breaks in canon and the Star Wars lore in certain films and the recent Acolyte series, which I've never seen, but I've just heard the reviews from, where there was a break in how things have been portrayed before, which suddenly creates all kinds of plot holes in all the previous material elsewhere that wasn't taken into account. Like, oh, if a Jedi can do this, then why didn't they use that in this other movie, and so on and so forth. So there is something to be said for consistency. And with regards to vampires, there are adherents to that, people who, like yourself, are very informed on all its various forms and have seen so much material that you're going to spot these inconsistencies. And we need, as writers, to ensure that we take those sorts of people into account. But there's also some degree of wiggle room, I think, that maybe your story would just be told better if this specific power was not there, or if this one was amped up or whatever. And it can also be used to make things a little bit unpredictable if things are just different than what one expected. But yeah, I get what you're saying. I don't think I recognized to the same degree you did what was breaking the lore in this film so much. But it's a lot to keep track of, too, because you can't have seen every single movie that it's ever been made, and you don't know, based on the historical accuracy of things. But I'm willing to let it go in a movie that's as silly as this.
I'll let it go because it was still fun. It wasn't like, oh, this movie is trash now. But there's a certain amount of like, okay, typically this isn't how vampires work. And I can throw some of that away. I think the bigger issue was it didn't establish anything and within its own rules and its own world. And B, it just kind of didn't make sense because like a kill had almost less effect than like a bite, for example. And control happened in ways that was lesser extreme than like, without saying too much, a vampire character that comes into it later. How that happens should be something more severe, but then he has more power and control than someone who was only bitten. So like it's more like the severity should come with either more control or something, like it shouldn't, or if there's a reason, like it's always fine to even within its own lore to be like, oh, this happened before, but now this changed, this before this blood sacrifice, or like with magic, you can create, and undead creatures, you can create so many different reasons. You can make up a reason, but just to kind of establish it. And again, I still love this movie. It was fun. I was happy to watch it again. So it wasn't anything that ruined it for me, but I love everything else so much about it that I'm like, if they would have just taken like, it could have even been like 1 or 2 lines of like, oh, this is not even saying this is why this is happening, but there's creative ways where you can kind of establish what's happening and why with just making it a stronger film overall.
And our hands are tied a bit here and that we can't really say, what we're talking about.
Yeah. Trying to be sort of vague.
Yeah. But I was picking up what you're putting down there because I've seen the film, and hopefully those who have will understand too. Filmed in Ireland for the United States, I presume this is meant to be New York or thereabouts. The makeup and visual effects are top-notch. The casting is superb. The thoughtfully and skillfully executed cinematography has an epic and operatic quality. The editing is snappy and well-paced. One might say everything comes together perfectly, like a symphony of horror, if you will. So, Symphony of Horror is part of the title for Nosferatu, A Symphony of Horror.
Oh.
So I thought you'd pick up on that, but
see, I can't keep all of the vampire logic in my brain.
Nobody can.
Was it part of the original title?
Yeah, it's called Nosferatu, A Symphony of Horror. The 1920 whatever the fuck. Yeah. Anyway.
The setting is peak Gothic elegance meets grimy death trap. To be honest, if it was me, that immaculate library and the vampire slaughter ball dance performances alone would have had me perfectly content to just stop fighting for a way out like a pawn trapped in a maze and settle into my new glorious home. The home itself is just as menacing, taunting, and full of dark secrets as Abigail, offering a chilling, labyrinthian atmosphere and serving as a compelling character in itself. I imagine the macabre, mysterious house did something for you?
It did, very much. It almost gave me asthma. It was so dusty. But yeah, I very much like that. And it raised questions for me. It made me suspicious as to, okay, come on. There's a reason they're in that specific place. Nobody leaves such a lavish place with so many works of art and so forth laying around. So there's a clue in there, I suppose, nothing else. This is kind of almost a whodunit because there's a mysterious aspect, a layer to it, which I enjoyed. I knew something was up, and I like that depth and complexity it has, everything from the characters down to the story in each scene. So good stuff.
Yeah, just the setting as a whole was really interesting and kind of, when I first watched it, I was like, oh, this would make a great haunt potential. I'm a big haunted house fan. So like a lot of times there's certain horror films that are just so immersive in their worlds and chilling where you can kind of just see the potential to make it an immersive experience. And second viewing, it kind of reminded me of there's something called the It Experience in Vegas that is an incredible, it's an escape room, which I'm like, okay, this would be a perfect setup for. But it's part haunted house. It's like, so there was part 1 and part 2 because there's 2, films. So it's kind of, it mirrors the films, but it kind of makes your own story, almost like makes you a character in it with like unique characters.
And you did this?
Yes.
Okay.
So I think each part, it was like 3 hours total.
Wow.
And it was, so I'm not great at puzzles. So normally escape rooms, and I even worked at an escape room for a little bit. So I have a little bit of like the mindset of things to look out for. But, like it can be so many little things like especially if you know the story, like, because I had reread the book right before we went. And so I'm thinking, okay, look out for this number because that was the year that this was burned down. And it was just like, no, you just have to find a hidden number on the door that means nothing, So sometimes you can get too inside with it. But it was kind of licensed through Lionsgate. So everything was movie quality. So it was just like you were walking into the movie, like you have Pennywise coming down and attacking you from above. So it was just, everything was really just incredible. And, but I think one of the most fun parts of it was there's actors who were in it with you. And even some of them are like kind of characters that are interacting with you for a long time. For example, one of them was with you. It's supposed to be part 2. You've been away for 27 years and it's someone you went to high school with. And so it's kind of like they push you to kind of like start to figure out things on yourself. But if you're really not getting it, they'll push you in the right direction, which I appreciate because I need that because I want the full story and experience. But they'll do it in a way that still feels like authentic to the story and characters and everything. But yeah, it just kind of made me think something like that where you had a big space that you could create like this and have some of those like high-end like vampire effects lunging at you, and even especially for this because they're trying to get out, they're trapped in here. So it'd be like just a perfect setup for like an immersive haunted whodunit escape room. So get on it.
Yeah,
Universal.
I can totally see that. And do you know who Jenny Nicholson is?
Sounds familiar.
She's a YouTuber, and she did, I think it was Vampire Diaries, an extensive, like 3 hours deep dive. I think of you whenever I see that pop up on my feed. But anyway,
like a deep dive of the show?
Yeah, I didn't watch it, so I couldn't tell you what it was necessarily involved, nor did I watch Vampire Diaries.
I thought you were telling me there was like an immersive Vampire Diaries haunt. I'm
no,
like, where do I go?
Not to bring it back to Star Wars yet again, but she did a more recent deep dive into the Star Wars hotel at Disney that recently closed. It was only open for like a couple years, and it utterly failed. And it's very similar to what you're saying as far as interactive role-playing in this environment. And they had Star Wars characters mingling around with the people, and they were trying to find, I think you had a choice of several different adventures that you could be on. And as a Star Wars fan, you think that would sound interesting to me, but I just cringe at the thought of actors acting out a role in real life with me in a way that they're trying to act enthusiastic or interested about it, and I'm trying to fantasize along with them, asking them about other characters and getting clues off of them. That feels very cringy to me. So I don't know if I could really enjoy even a haunted experience like that. It would be more, I can do like a maze, but I don't think I'd want to. Maybe I'm just not a people person.
Yeah, I was going to say, because I went with my other friend who we were both former scare actors, and we interacted so much with these actors that at the end of the show, they came and found us at like almost in tears of like, you guys were so great. And they like, thank you so much. Like, just because like we were probably just acting like we were just in an improv based film, because we were like going off of them and creating characters like, oh, remember this time in high school? Like we were just like, and probably you have a lot of people, some people do this just for like work team events, or they don't really know what they're getting into. They don't take it seriously. There's, I've definitely been in the as a scare actor, where I've been attacked as a scare actor because sometimes people just want to prove how tough that they are. Like, I'm not scared of you, sort of a thing. And you do sometimes just get drunk idiots and stuff too. So I'm sure they probably get a lot of people who aren't the best to work off of, and you could tell there was just like a lot of hard work and passion from everyone there. I think everyone there was working like 13-hour shifts and things like that. Yeah, I think that just kind of made it, I guess if you didn't like talking, I mean, it's in some instances I don't like talking to people, but it kind of depends. If it's kind of in a haunted, fun, immersive. I mean, I love like immersive storytelling. I just want to live in all the stories. So that's a part of it. I'm also just a big Pennywise fan. So I was just like, I had like a nice moment with Pennywise. There's one point where he kind of bangs against the window. And then I had my hand there and he just like grabbed my hand. We just nicely held hands for a minute.
Scandalous.
Yeah, I probably wasn't the most like, it was like I was kind of trying, but I was also like, yeah, team Pennywise, so it's okay if he wins.
Although I can enjoy a great many musical styles, there's something about an actual orchestral score which lends a greater production value, quality, and stature to anything it accompanies, elevating the material it is married with in a way nothing else quite can. The score here is magnificent, from the original score by Brian Tyler to Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake, which Abigail dances to as a ballerina, a piece also used as the main theme in Universal's 1931 Dracula with Bela Lugosi.
Very fitting.
With that, it's funny how, by association, this ballet about swans and love has been converted into a classic horror vampire theme. There's even an ice cream truck in my neighborhood that plays that same Swan Lake piece, which chills me to the bone each time I hear it luring children through its screechy speakers. Did you dance to Swan Lake when you were a kid?
I never did ballet. I respect, but no. I mostly did jazz and hip hop.
For fuck's sake, I would not have thought that. When you were saying dance, I was thinking, I don't know what I was thinking, but it wasn't jazz and hip hop. It doesn't seem to fit you at all.
Actually, I feel like some people might just have the preconceived notion of like, because I like horror and dark things, but hip hop has always been one of my favorite genres of music, and I like the dance especially. I don't know, it's just very lively and expressive, and I've always done more, like when I did dance, it was definitely more contemporary, like modern sort of styles.
Well, good for you.
Yeah. On that note, I loved how fully the bloodbath ballet element was utilized. It wasn't just, oh, she happens to be a ballerina, here's one dance number. Being a dancer became a part of her monstrous manifestation, movements, and theatrics, giving her just as gleeful joy as her feeding and taunting her victims did, the two often becoming one, all a part of her in predatory mode. In a previous episode on the 1994 film, Interview with the Vampire, I talked about how the over-the-top theatrics of the vampire theater troupe really took me out of a lot of the pivotal moments of the film. Abigail relishes in her macabre theatrics. She is tongue-in-cheek, witty, and not afraid of a good taunting zinger. But a key difference here is she gives off a multi-dimensional characterization, whereas the vampire troupe was very face value. While there is still much we don't know about Abigail and her story, we are given enough of a complex range of emotions and her story paired with simply seeing the type of vampire that she is in action. The theatrics work partially because she gives us more than those alone, and the suspense, tension, and rapidly preying darkness never fades among even the most fun-filled moments.
The very lifeblood of this film, or any other, is its story, characters, and dialogue. Yet, these crucial aspects are largely non-existent in most other horror films in favor of jump scares, a gimmicky premise, or dependence upon some pre-existing franchise or intellectual property. It should be noted that quality writing has no effect on a film's budget. It doesn't cost one goddamn red cent more to inhabit your film with a quality story. Either filmmakers don't care 95% of the time, are incapable of producing such things, or remain oblivious to the benefit. Similarly, casting distinctive actors who best fit that part and who can act doesn't cost any more than casting the bland actor. It doesn't cost any more time or money to place the camera here instead of there to compose a better shot. It costs the same to use certain notes of music over others. Such don't cost a thing, yet are the most valuable components to any film. And it's not like there's ever been any shortage of filmmaking talent from writers, actors, or composers to choose from. How do producers, executives, and investors not pay attention to this, since these choices make a film perform better at no extra cost? There is no reason why the artistic drive and financial drive can't work together, but for some reason, rarely do. This is a film I can access on streaming, yet I feel compelled to actually buy it on physical media just so I can have it and make sure it will never go away. It elicits a desire in me to contribute something back financially or through positive reviews or word of mouth to promote and support the furtherance of it and encourage such future works. That's what quality filmmaking does. So make your movie great, not just for the quick buck, but because it makes financial sense. One would think that over time, the evidence of this would reveal itself and eventually dawn on filmmakers in a consistent way. But thus far, it is not, and I suspect it never will.
I think I had pretty low, I wouldn't say low. I expected this to be fun. I didn't really expect a lot more. And I think it also happened to be like sort of niche things I'm really into. Like, I like dancing and vampires and blood. So, and I like, I definitely can appreciate the more like purely just serious, stark examination of horror, as a whole, or definitely in, vampires. I don't like them to be too comical where like the whole thing is a joke and they don't care to put any thought or style or substance in them. And luckily this gave us all of that, and I think a lot more. And there was just a lot, pretty much everything we talked about, from the acting to writing to interesting characters that worked well off each other. And it did something that's not easy to do in meshing a lot of different styles and subgenres without, I think it probably still focused on the horror more than any other, but it still had fun with itself in a way that it still kept that kind of creepiness alive. And I think even it had a lot of investment in just the setting and situation. And it, as I know you mentioned before that there wasn't a lot of jump scares, and I love that because I don't mind the occasional jump scare, I get it, but that feels more like false manufactured force. Like they're trying to trick you into being, oh, wasn't this scary? And even when I get that question, was this scary? And I'm like, that's irrelevant. It's more, was this compelling, interesting? Was it fun? Was it engaging? Was it a good story? There's so many, other elements that are more important. And I think just the entrapping atmosphere, I think, really did a lot. And the whole, the mystery and the whodunit, and even once they kind of figure out what they're dealing with and trying to slowly find ways that they can fight back, and even that they're smart and resilient, but not without their flaws. Like they felt like very, they're definitely more of a, I guess, extreme of savvy, they're criminals, they're used to dealing with difficult situations and reading people and being ruthless and smart, but still they were still realistic enough where it wasn't something that seemed like this above and beyond, of course, that this characterization could do that. So I think it was just like it was partially just the protagonist and the villain were both so interesting in their own ways, which is hard to get in a horror film. Like you don't always get that, but some of my favorites, like Nightmare on Elm Street, definitely love Freddy, but I love Nancy. So when you're kind of torn, where a part of you is invested in both of their strength and winning, it's just more fun and dramatic and enticing. It just makes for a better story. So I think that dynamic, how interesting they all were, and just that this place that they were in was fascinating and terrifying at the same time. Like it didn't need a bunch of jump scares. It was better to have those attack moments be fun, but visceral and gritty at the same time.
Yeah, it all came together more organically. You could I was going to say theoretically, but it's done all the time, make a film with simple devices of editing or jump scares or sound design, things which each in themselves have a quality that is unnerving, but at the expense of the plot and the characters and the people. And I think that's what Hollywood leans into most and what I'm most disappointed by. But this one, it's like while he was writing it, let the story and characters guide him into where things are going to go, and discovered things in the characters as they were being developed, which would work well with other points that other characters had. And it just felt like it developed with a life of its own. And I really appreciate that. There's nothing formulaic about this film at all.
Yeah, I agree with that. It seemed like all the characters in the story itself kind of have their own life and kind of authenticity that just kind of works well. And to your other point, I think most horror films, I do go in with pretty low expectations, probably even more so when they get more of the rave hype. And I think it's definitely a lot of the marketing. It's like they think that they need to like shock, like everything has to be so shock, like the most shocking vision of horror you've seen in 10 years. That's like almost every movie that comes out now. So I don't take it seriously at all. And I would prefer to have lower expectations going in. And I remember a few years ago, there was a Spanish film called Veronica that they definitely heavily, it's so scary, no one can watch the whole thing. Like, they're just trying to make it so terrifying. And it was a disservice to the film because the film was really interesting. They had really great child actors in it who were, and it was based on a reported haunting that had happened. And so I get they were kind of trying to play into the realness of this and so terrifying. And can you watch something like this? And but it turned so many people away because it wasn't just this constant jump scare. And I think the situation was gripping and horrifying. But more importantly, it just had a really great story. And it just felt very genuine and gritty and real. And it was just like a compelling, good film where it's like promoted as that. Like, that's the best thing about it.
I think they're just insecure and risk averse. There was a film in the 90s, Clueless with Alicia Silver. There was a poster, I remember it said like something to the effect of like shopping, fashion, sex. What's the problem? And she's sitting there with a sort of shrug or something on the poster. And I remember really like, ew, I don't want to see that. Yeah. But when I watched it, I love this movie. It's so many levels and it's so funny and clever and it plays on so many different things. And I was annoyed that there was such a disconnect between the marketing people and the actual storytellers, to where as an audience member, you're going into it expecting something and you're getting something else. You're setting yourself up for disappointment on both the people putting this film out there as well as the people who are watching it.
Yeah, I think that happens a lot with comedy, especially teen or more young adult comedies. Whereas I think horror, it's the, so shocking, so scary, and just focusing on that. Where with those kind of like teenage comedies, I feel like even when they have this like smarter, more complex, relatable script, rather than celebrating, is that they tend to market it in a way that's like dumbed down and sexed up. Like, I guess that they think that's what sells, but there's been a lot of films that have a lot of bigger resonance and meaning and are just smarter and fresher and funnier than you would think, because they're not, that's not the image that's being put forward. Abigail should satisfy the blood fiends, offering decapitation, swamps of the dead, and hidden chambers, blood-soaked dance slaughter numbers, and nearly endless blood explosions, flowing until the very end. The style as a whole, but especially the closing shot, is so reminiscent of the director's previous fun-filled bloodbath, Ready or Not, that it feels like a nod to the film in itself. Among this, the style and execution of the film very much feels like its own beast. While there is some CGI, it isn't all that noticeable or distracting, and more importantly, there are some beautifully grotesque shots that make it worth celebrating.
On Rotten Tomatoes, this film holds an 83% critic score and 85% audience score. It is rare to see such high ratings in parody, especially of this genre. Produced for $28 million, Abigail earned $42.4 million at the box office worldwide. Taking into account marketing costs, I'm not sure if that even breaks even. Still, with streaming service models being what they are today, who the heck knows what funds are raked in across the various platforms, in addition to rentals and physical media. But considering the quality, and being distributed by Universal Pictures, I'm surprised it did not have a much greater reach. Regardless, I hope this film did well, for I would like nothing more than for projects like this to set an example and be rewarded for their quality. I thoroughly enjoyed this film. I found it a smart, quality work that has fun with horror, filled with many satisfying twists and surprises. As a miscellaneous point, there's Abigail and then Annabelle. I'm not sure if they were trying to make them sound the same so people would confuse this with that successful horror franchise, or if it was just a coincidence. We spoke on our last podcast about how exorcisms are a least favorite genre of ours for the most part, but I think haunted dollies for me are the most worn-out premise. I never saw any of those films related to the Annabelle doll, nor do I care to.
I've not either. I don't know. Maybe I would at some point, but it just didn't seem that interesting to me. I've seen other within the Conjuring universe. Now, have you watched or do you like Chucky?
I do like Chucky.
I love Chucky's. That's the one exception that especially I love the original film, but what they have done with the show is just absolutely incredible.
That's with Mark Hamill?
I think he's in it some. It's like all the original.
But
it's Don Mancini and Fiona Dorff, Brad Dorff, Jennifer Tilly's in it.
Mark Hamill, not to again bring it back to Star Wars, who played Luke Skywalker. He played, I think, the voice of Chucky in the most recent movie or one of the more recent movies or the show. I'm not sure which.
He's not Chucky in the show because that's Brad Dorff who did the original voice in the original film. But he might have, I feel like maybe he had like a cameo, like they introduced him as maybe that was What We Do in the Shadows, never mind, which is another great show. Also vampires.
Yes, yes. You're talking about Mark Hamill again?
Yeah, I think that's what I was thinking of when you mentioned him. He was a cameo character in What We Do in the Shadows. That was it.
I did not even recognize him for the first 10 minutes of his entrance either, so I guess that means he's a good actor.
Yeah.
This also has a bit of a Megan vibe, with a twisted little girl antagonist running amok while dancing a bit here and there. I knew going into it that Abigail was a film you liked, Kelsey, but I was uncertain as to the degree. Your opinion of Megan, with its similar tones, was not so positive as I recall, while I absolutely loved that one.
You couldn't see me, but I was like aghast and offended gestures over here. But I've seen a lot of people compare the two films, and to me that's weird. I don't think they're hardly anything alike at all, but I guess I guess there's like a slight horror connection with Megan, but I think for me, it felt like Megan was trying to be Chucky meets Black Mirror, but it didn't dig deeper into either of them. I think it had some good ambition, and especially in the satire and critiques it was trying to create with, dark side of technology and just dependence and not making up for human connection, but it had a real weird direction where it kind of didn't stick the landing, and the tones were here. I felt like the different genre meshes worked so well together. The different tones really didn't work there for me. Not to go into a full review on Megan, but it had a moment or two, but I really didn't like it overall, and I loved Abigail so much more. So Abigail wins for me.
I think I liked Abigail more as well, but I did really like Megan. I didn't see the regular cut. I watched the extended version. I think it was the unrated.
Unrated, I think I watched that one too. Abigail is a gloriously gory, twisty, and morbidly fun horror film with incredible ferocity and just enough heart to be endearing. I typically am one for horror with substance, exploration, and offering some freshness. But this is the rare example of a horror film that is more surface level and not without its flaws, but thrives as an immensely fun, bloody good time without needing to be more. Admittedly, Abigail doesn't bring anything new to the vampire subgenre, and likely won't be all that impactful or lasting, but it is incredibly fun, surprisingly nuanced, and satisfying in many ways that makes it quite easy to acknowledge but look past the flaws and simply relish in the marvelously macabre chills, thrills, and undead but not unfeeling heart it possesses. If you would like to join our society of grotesquerie and loathing, subscribe now and give this podcast a like.
And be sure to comment your wretched thoughts below.
Keep our podcast suffering on by finding it in your cold, black, withered hearts to support us on Patreon.
A link to our PayPal is also below for one-time donations of any amount.
It was nice knowing you.